Welcome back to You, Me, and the Killer, episode 3.
So today we are going to be doing a video that focuses on the Columbine shootings victims. The reason why we decided to talk about the victims today, it doesn't escape either of us that a lot of times the victims are the most touched by the killers that we talk about. And a lot of times we do neglect to mention the victims. That being said, I can personally speak honestly that I have cried while doing research on various of the killers that we have done. Only very disturbing, what these victims went through. I can't, begin to imagine how the families are coping. For this episode, we are dedicating time to talk about the victims, to just kind of remind. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because we talk a lot about the killers.
Yeah, and to be fair, the reason why we talk about the killers is because the killers, I think we talk about the killers because we can't believe what they did. I think the reason why we talk about the killer, not so much about the victims, because the killers do take, active choice to commit horrendous crimes, and the victims are usually there by chance.
As Renat said, the victims were just there at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and they find themselves in these difficult situations. So just be aware of your surroundings. Make sure you know the closest exit. And
where is our closest exit?
There's one over there.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be hard. In some places, I don't want to give anybody ideas, but
yeah,
it's difficult. But always try to know what you could do to protect yourself and others. I think that's important to know.
I agree.
All right, so the first victim was Rachel Scott, and she was 17 years old. But, before I give you a little bit more information about what happened to her, I actually remember hearing her story back when I was a freshman in high school, when a speaker came to my high school.
And how long ago was that?
Like a long time. Sadly, a pretty long time ago. So what stayed with me was that she actually predicted, from what I remember, she actually predicted the incident.
Did she?
Yeah. So what I remember is that in her diary, I don't know if it was diary or notebook because I don't remember things that clearly. She drew a rose in tears. I'm getting shivers all over my body. I remember them talking about how there was 13 tears falling on the rose. Or I think the tears were red. I don't really remember.
Wait, what?
And that was the 13 victims.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god. She predicted what was going to happen. I remember her being a very faithful person. I think she was Christian.
Yeah, yes, she was.
And I was like, oh my god, that's so sad.
That is so sad.
And I don't remember it that clearly, but I remember her already knowing that she was going to die. I think a day or two beforehand, she knows that she wasn't going to live a long time.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, that's so sad.
That is insane.
Yeah, I'm like, well, that was my little story from what I remember.
About Rachel Scott. So,
yeah.
How old was Rachel when she got murdered?
She was 17. She was the first person to actually get killed by Dylan and Eric. She was hit 4 times while eating lunch with her friend at the entrance of the school. She was actually still alive after being shot a couple times, but when he came back to see if she was dead or not, he asked her, "Do you still believe in God?" And she responded I do.
Mm-hmm.
And then Eric said, "Well, go be with him," and then shot her in the head.
That's insane to me. That's actually so sad.
Yeah.
So the oldest victim was Dave Sanders, who was the only teacher that actually ended up getting killed. He was 47 at the time, and he was very involved in the school. He had been a teacher for about 25 years, a coach for the basketball and softball teams. And then after he died, he did leave behind a wife, 4 children, as well as grandchildren. He's described as a hero because he successfully managed to get around 100 students away from dangers. Only imagine that maybe the numbers would be a little bit higher if he didn't do what he did.
I remember reading that he really stepped up and saved a lot of lives. But the next victim is Daniel Roberg. He was 15. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Well, that morning, he actually had a conversation with his mom, and she gave him a kiss over breakfast, which they usually don't do because they usually don't see each other in the morning. And then he never came back home, sadly. He was heading to a nearby park when he was eating lunch at that time, and that's when they shot him. He was shot in the chest, abdomen, and leg, and he died on the sidewalk. Sadly, his body remained outside in a pool of blood for 24 hours, that's okay. I don't know why the police allowed that. That's not okay.
Yeah. The next victim that we are talking about is Kyle Velasquez, and again, we are sorry if we are pronouncing any of the names wrong. So Kyle was 16 at the time. He was definitely a sweetheart. He was described as being this big, loving teddy bear. During the shootings, he was held hostage at the library. All the details of the shooting you would be able to hear in our podcast. So go check that out if you haven't already.
Yeah.
Point of the shooting, he had been attending Columbine for about 3 months, which is crazy because if this shooting happened weeks before it happened, he wouldn't have been there. He would have been going home.
This is so sad because it's all about circumstances.
Yeah, which is definitely something that we see with a lot of them.
Yeah. All right. So the next victim is Stephen Kerno. I'm probably really pronouncing this wrong. He was the youngest victim of the shooting because he was 14 years old, and he had planned to become a Navy top gun pilot. He was shot on the neck with a sawed-off shotgun. He was a big fan of Star Wars because he was waiting for the upcoming release of the new movie, and which is really sad. He was really hyped up. Yes, and at the funeral, his mom, stated that thank you for that special moment 2 weeks ago when you said, "Mom, I bet there aren't many guys who can discuss things with their moms like we do." It's really sweet.
That is sweet. So we are talking about now Casey Bernal, who was 17 at the time of the shooting. Casey had been, having a rebellious phase. She was experimenting with alcohol and drugs. So then her parents sent her for this, church retreat so she can, get her stuff together. And they said that when she came back that they had gotten their little girl back. She had started at a new school, which unfortunately was Columbine. So she was, at the time of the shooting, she was at the library, so she was held hostage there. Alongside another girl. So then when the shooting happened, they hid under the table, and when they did that, Harris came and he slapped the top of the table twice and said peekaboo. So sadistic, like these people are so scared. And he shot her at the side of the head and she died immediately.
Alright, so the next victim is Isaiah Scholes. He was 18. He was an aspiring comedian, and he was also born with a heart defect. He played football and also did wrestling. He was studying in the library at that time with his friends when the shooters came. They all hid under a table. Didn't spy the popular athletes. He called over Eric, and they flanked the table on both sides and started to say racist rants against Isaiah. And then they attempted to pull him out from under the table, but when they failed, Harris shot him. One of his friends managed to survive, but by playing dead in a pool of blood of his dying friends.
Talking about is Matthew Kester, who was 16 at the time. Matthew was alongside Isaiah. He was one of the people that were there with Isaiah. He also was a part of the football team like Isaiah. He was a weightlifter, he was a straight-A student. He definitely had a very promising future, and then his parents said that he was a wonderful role model to his little brother.
And then the next victim is Lauren Townsend. I think that's how you say it. She was 18 at the time. She died in the library floor after being shot several times in the head, chest, and lower body. She was actually shot more times than any of the other victims, but we don't know the reasons why. She was a straight-A student and volunteered at a local animal shelter, and she was captain of the volleyball team.
John Tomlin was 17 at the time that he was murdered. He had came up with this habit where he would study during his lunch. So he was at the library when the shooting happened, and he hid under the table, and when Nicole Nolan was trying to find a hiding spot, he reached out his hand and grabbed her so she can hide with him. And then throughout the whole shooting, he was holding her hand and telling her that she is going to be okay. He got shot by Harris, and then Dylan went around and shot him again in the head. The girl he ended up helping to hide with him ended up surviving.
The victim is Kelly Fleming. She just started going to Columbine just 3 months before the shooting, which is really unfortunate. She was writing poems, which is usual for her, at the library when they entered, and she hid under a table, but because it was so crowded, she was partially visible. Eric just came behind her and shot her.
Wow. Daniel Moser was 15 at the time of the shooting. He, again, hid under the table like the rest of the students that we talked about. When the shooters came, he just pushed a chair to try to get them off guard. And obviously it didn't work. Or Harris shot him, he told him. Harris commented and said, "Nice glasses." And he shot Daniel in the face. So just like Rachel, he kind of also did predict what was going to happen, because he was asking his dad about 2 weeks before he died about American gun laws, and he asked about a loophole in the Brady bill, and he was shot by a gun that was bought through one of the loopholes he was asking about.
Oh my god. Well, the next person is Corey DePuter. I think I'm saying this wrong, but I'm sorry about that. He was 17. He was known to be an all-American kid who put schoolwork above everything else. His friend Stefan watched as Dylan aimed a semi-automatic gun at Corey and pulled the trigger, which must have been really traumatizing. Stefan at his funeral said that people said that he was the kind of guy people liked to be around. I know I for sure did. He was always able to pick our spirits up in a gloomy situation. So he was known, well liked by his peers.
Yeah. And I think while we've been talking about the victims, it might have felt like a long time to all of you guys, but if we can take a step back and think about, these people had families, these people had mothers, these people had brothers, sisters, girlfriends, boyfriends. This has touched so many lives.
It's a very touchy and difficult subject because sadly how common it is. And to be honest, I don't know what we can do to stop it. Because,
I can think of one thing.
Oh, okay. Obviously removing guns. Yes. But it's kind of like become a trend, which is kind of sad.
Yes. And we actually did touch on that in the podcast. So once again, go check that out if you haven't already. Our condolences go to the families that we mentioned today and to the victims whose lives are stolen way too early.
Yeah, and to all the other victims, like the other kids that managed to survive or were injured.
Absolutely. Because just the PTSD that people have had to live with after that is just, I can't begin to imagine.
Yeah.
But again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Please
Bye.
like and subscribe.
Yes, do that.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.